Good morning and welcome to Community Conversations. I'm Vicki Green. So, you've probably heard of the big annual pop culture event that gets national and international coverage, and it's mentioned on one of my favorite TV shows, The Big Bang Theory, and that's Comic-Con. But our own version in Massachusetts is coming soon, and it's called CalmerCon, as in CalMer, CalmerCon, which is made for a wide sector of the population that has sensory issues getting overstimulated easily, like being on the autism spectrum or ADHD. So to discuss this second annual event and the challenges and wonders of having a child who's been diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum or having somewhat similar issues like ADHD are my guests in studio today, Adam Wilson, who is the founder of a nonprofit based in Massachusetts called calmpassion.org. Welcome, Adam.
Morning, Vicki.
And we have a well-known educator, local and national speaker, and executive functioning coach, that's a tough one to say, from ADHD Essentials, Brendan Mahan.
Hi, Vicki. How are you?
Great. Thank you both for being here this morning. This is a terrific event. So before we talk about the event, why, Adam, is there such a need for a family event like this?
Well, for those parents out there that are listening that have kids on the spectrum or have sensory needs, there are a lot of things that they can do these days, they can bring their kids to. They can do like swimming lessons or horseback riding, any of that kind of stuff. But it's more of a singular event for the kids, and the parents kind of either wait off to the side or they go do something else. So there's what's missing in the equation is a lot of family-style events. So that's kind of how we got started.
All right. So can you explain how and why you founded your nonprofit, Calm Passion?
Sure. I have a son on the autism spectrum. He's 16 now. And when he was younger, we tried going to traditional Comic-Con type events because he was really into animation and comic books and action figures and all
Star
that sort
Wars,
of stuff.
right?
Oh, yep. Yeah. I'm more Star Wars than he is.
Oh.
He loves a lot of the other stuff. That's where my fandom comes into the equation. But so we found that he was getting overwhelmed at these events because they're very crowded. They're very loud, and they're often in big echoey spaces. So there's a lot of stuff going on there that overwhelms him.
So what is it like for him on a typical day? I mean, if he's on the spectrum, does he have trouble? Because I know in my personal, we talked about this before the show, is I know someone who has a son that's on the spectrum, and they call him fully highly functioning. But we took a trip, and we had to just worry about things like the airport. And I was worried about getting through security, and we're worried about him being overstimulated in an airport situation. And you never know. Sometimes it could be, a restaurant or anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about sensory overstimulation is that it can affect any of your senses. My son is particularly sensitive to smells, which is not all that common, but sometimes we'll go somewhere, and if, like you said, a restaurant, if we go into a restaurant and there's a smell in there that he doesn't like, it can ruin his entire afternoon.
Yeah.
So, and also things like, a lot of people don't know we have a sense of what's around us. So if you're too crowded in a space, that can really cause him to be triggered as well.
And I think people can relate to that because that's something that, people get claustrophobic. So you take that and you magnify it. And that's just in one sense, one sensory, issue. And I know there's been other organizations that are getting better at this. Brendan, you can speak to this too. I know that I used to work at the Discovery Museum in Acton, and they have often events just for people on the spectrum for sensory that are concerned about sensory overload. Are we seeing more of that?
Yeah, it's starting to develop as a movement now. So there's movie theaters that are starting to provide sensory sensitive movies where the lights are not completely turned off. There's a little bit of dim light going on, and it's not as loud. I don't even have sensory issues that significant, but movies are too loud for me.
Me too.
And I took my boys to their first concert not that long ago. We went to see Weird Al, and it was too loud. My boys, we brought earplugs, we gave them earplugs. It was still too loud for them. So some of it, I think, is we just need to turn things down a little bit. I don't know why everything's so loud nowadays, but Gavin in particular, we skip the previews on movies because they're louder than the movie itself. So we just wait until the preview is done, and then we go in and watch. And he's 10.
And they're not diagnosed with any?
No, not currently. But
okay.
if they end up getting diagnosed with anything, it'll be ADHD, and they have the right dad for that. So
That's right, they do.
Yeah, we're building skills.
So on that's my question. Can you explain the difference between, first of all, what the autism spectrum, when you say spectrum, what's the difference between beginning and end? And then some people, I think ADHD is the same thing, and it's not.
No, they're different, and they actually both exist on a spectrum. Okay. The spectrum just meaning there's a different level of intensity with regard to symptoms, right? Like if you think of it like the volume on the radio you're listening to right now, that's a spectrum. You can turn it down real low, you can turn it up real high, and you're going to have a different experience. So kids with ADHD, some of them are nonverbal, and adults with ADHD too, for that matter. Some people with ADHD, let me withdraw and rephrase. Some people with autism are nonverbal.
Right.
And so that's pretty obvious. And then you've got other folks who are autistic that you wouldn't even know. You wouldn't necessarily pick up on the signs that they're on the spectrum unless you are trained in that and you're sort of able to pick up on things like body language and some nonverbal cues that can give you a hint. And that's what we mean when we say that it's on a spectrum, just that it varies pretty significantly.
So ADHD would be defined as what versus autism?
So autism is tends to have more sensory concerns than ADHD people do. There's more social challenges that come with autism around reading nonverbal cues and identifying social cues. ADHD people tend to be better at that. Sometimes we're actually really good at it. And I say we because I have ADHD. Mm-hmm. Folks with ADHD tend to be, our functioning is better, is more likely to be better. Sort of our spectrum is narrower.
Day-to-day living.
Yeah, and where we tend to struggle is sort of the adulting skills, right?
Organization,
planning and prioritizing, remembering to do the thing that you need to do. Sometimes when you do remember about the thing, you just have trouble starting to do the thing or finishing it. And so it's things that make us look lazy or unmotivated, but that's not what's going on. It's all brain chemistry.
Right. So now, Adam, your son, you mentioned, is on the autism spectrum. And you said there's obviously been challenges, but how about key learnings for you as a parent? You talk about wonderful things. I read something you wrote about the wonderful things about having an autistic son. What are those?
Well, I mean, from my perspective, he's 16 now, but he kind of presents more like a 12-year-old. Mm-hmm. So he tends to find joy in things that he always has as a kid. He hasn't kind of outgrown the sort of joyful things that he had when he was younger. He's also friendly and kind to everybody. You know, when he's not overwhelmed. When he's overwhelmed, he just doesn't want to deal with anybody at all. But in general, he treats everybody fairly, and he's kind. And I think sometimes for 16-year-olds, that's not necessarily the norm.
No, I agree with you. And it's interesting that you can find people often go to the negative, or my son's having trouble in school, or my son's having, but there are wonderful things about that. Now, the number of autistic children specifically is growing, and it's been said it could be because of maybe better reporting, more diagnoses, because of an increased understanding in the medical and mental health fields of what to look for. But according to the CDC, in 2018, approximately 1 in 59 children is diagnosed with being on the autism spectrum. Boys are 4 times more likely than girls to be diagnosed, which I thought was interesting because I don't understand why that necessarily would be. And what I also found interesting, because I don't hear it mentioned much, according to the CDC, almost half of the children with autism have IQs above average. This has nothing to do with intelligence, correct?
Yeah, no, it has nothing to do with intelligence. In the same way that you can have asthma and still be very strong or very fit, it's just a component of how we process information. A lot of this revolves around executive functions, which are that organization, time management, planning and prioritizing, emotional regulation, those kinds of things, which are all cognitive skills that lead to success and help us adult, like the word I used earlier. And both autism and ADHD are affected through the lens of executive functioning. I like to think of them as cousins because they've got there's some overlap, there's some connections there. They just present differently, and the range of that spectrum varies. Autism has a much more significant spectrum than ADHD does.
Adam, do you find that people that don't know your son, I don't know what it's like for him in school, would be my first question. And second, do you think sometimes people have the misconception that he's not doing well because he's not smart enough?
Yeah, I think that's just an inborn, sort of perception that people have of any needs kids, that it's an intelligence issue. But for him, he's very smart. He has something called a pervasive developmental delay. So when he's trying to learn something new, he's generally 3 or 4 years behind what he should be for his age. And he's a big kid anyway, like he's almost as tall as I am at 16. So I think it's a perception versus reality issue. Like he should be here at this age, and he'll catch up to that eventually. It just takes longer because also a lot of, when he's trying to work through things, it triggers anxiety. He also has it's another thing that you don't hear a lot is that a lot of kids on the spectrum are dealing with a very large amount of anxiety, because when you get overstressed, it kicks in your fight or flight, resource in your brain. And so you start to breathe a little faster, you start to sweat, you start to get excited, and this can, really be a hindrance to learning new things.
Right, and is it not true that they also have trouble handling, there might be an outburst? In other words, they don't know how to deal with that when they get overloaded?
Yeah, that's generally that's like the final, part of it, component of it is. And every kid, that's also part of the spectrum. Every kid presents differently. My son is more likely to be non-compliant and shut down, which is good because he's a big kid.
So he's
not
quiet.
Yeah, he's not violent or anything like that. He will regress. He'll pull back, and he just wants to be left alone.
So when is he in his element? When is he happiest? We talked before the show about family, that you have a very supportive family because you stay home with him, and that he has cousins that he hangs out with. And, I think people listening can definitely understand because it's so common now. It's so much more common for people listening. They either know someone who has autism, they know someone with a child or a relative, or someone in the school classmate. So, what about having that family support?
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely happiest when, he's our only child. So when my wife and I and he are together doing something that he enjoys, that's when he's happiest. I think the second would be when he's on his computer or his tablet. He's kind of a mimic, which is why he likes cartoons so much. And he can do a lot of the voices of the animated characters. When we are able to get to a con, we generally will go to larger cons on like a Sunday morning when there's less
like
people.
a Comic-Con?
Yep.
Oh.
So we'll go to other ones, and he has headphones so that to help with the noise. Yep. And we know that we're not going to be there for the full day, but we try to meet with the people that he wants to see. And he can do some of the voices exactly like the voice actors, and they like really respond to that. And I've made some good friends in that world because of that.
Maybe there's a job for him in that.
Yeah, that's my hope that he'll be able to, or in the radio or as a podcaster or as a voiceover, any of those things. And he will stick to task on that because it's not given to him by anybody else at this point. He's kind of a perfectionist in that sort of thing, and he'll work really hard. But it's because nobody's standing behind him saying, you need to work hard on this, because that's where the anxiety comes in. When he's left to his own devices, he gets really good at things. Now,
Brendan, what do you think? How do you think the schools are? I mean, as we see more diagnoses, and I don't know if that's why the number seems to be getting higher. You can correct me if I'm wrong with that, but it seems like the schools, I know from talking to teachers that in some cases, usually they're on an IEP, right? An individual.
Yeah, typically. Right. Maybe a 504 if it's an ADHD kid.
What's a 504 for people that don't know?
So an IEP is an individualized education plan. It's very thorough. It's modifying the curriculum so that the kids can learn what they need to learn. And a 504 is more adjusting things. It's more accommodations. So you might have 5 fewer homework problems or something like that, but you're still doing basically the same work.
And you're not being pulled out of the classroom.
Right. Typically not.
Okay. So now that gets me to thinking about your son, Adam. Is he fully matriculated?
Well, I mean, we've been going through some things in the school, but he is now going to regular classes. He has a one-on-one support person that can pull him aside to work together with him if he needs it. Generally, he's been doing very well, actually. He's really been thriving in that environment. And I think it's very heartening to myself and my wife as parents to see him succeed, because we fought really hard to get him into the situation that he's in. And a lot of the parents that are listening to this will probably, can feel what I'm talking about, because they've been going through it in some level or another, because it's that fight between funding and what, really the kids should be getting.
Mm-hmm. And then you look at, there's the New England Center for Children, I think they call it officially, in Southborough on Route 9. Michael Dukakis, former governor, donated a lot of money and a lot of time into that. And there's other autistic schools around. So, I'm wondering how you decide when it's time to put a child through a program, or is that in addition to school?
I can speak on that. Yeah, generally that's a matter of funding. Unfortunately, at this point in time, there just isn't enough of it to go around. So I think it's kind of, you kind of actually need to know somebody at this point to get a recommendation to some of those places.
So that would have been a benefit? You would have, if you could have get in?
We kind of, we wanted him to be in regular high school if at all possible. There are options outside, but I mean, some of the higher end places are really exclusive and hard to get into.
And he's been talking to you about college, right?
Yeah, definitely. He's for several years. And I think, not ironically, it came from, he saw it on an animated series, like the kids all going to college. And he's like, oh, I'm going to go to college too. So I think part of our job as parents of autistic kids is to try to, have a typical an existence for our kids as possible and support them in the ways that we can.
Yeah, no, well said. So, Brendan, are we fortunate in this state, because it seems that so much work has been done at the State House going back to 2010 with the formation of the Massachusetts Autism Commission, and then major legislation passed in 2014 called the Autism Omnibus Law that established this 35-member commission to make recommendations about policies that impact people, both kids and adults, on the autism spectrum. So are we gaining ground legislatively? Is there more advocacy that needs to be done around this? We have Autism Speaks, we have National Autism Month, we have all of these things now that 10, 12 years ago maybe wasn't around.
Yeah, broadly speaking, in Massachusetts, we're at the forefront in terms of education, right? We put our money where our mouth is in this state. We've got the colleges, we've got the high schools, we've got the middle schools, we've got the elementary schools. We're driving a driving force in education nationally. In fact, the national standards for the English, for teaching English, are based on the Massachusetts standards.
Oh, really?
And they're literally word for word, because I've read them, both of them. Wow. So that's the kind of force that we are as a state. And so to me, that's encouraging, because if we're at the forefront of autism in terms of education, in terms of the care that we're providing for the folks who need it, then hopefully that will eventually extend also to the rest of the country, and the sensitivity and care and consideration that is needed will continue to move forward.
And speaking about Massachusetts often being a model, let's talk about this event, because this is, I think it's incredible. You started it last year, Adam, called CalmerCon. It's April 27th on the Becker College campus in Leicester. And it's similar to a regular comic book convention, but so much more. Can you explain about the event?
Yeah, so it's it has a lot of the hallmarks of a standard convention. We've got vendors, and we've got cosplayers, which is people in costumes, and things of that nature that are at, an artist, so things that are at a normal Comic-Con. But for this event, we separate events out into like classrooms to keep the noise level down, to be able to keep the flow moving through, so we can kind of help control if it gets too crowded. We can ask some folks that have been in a place for a while to maybe move on to another part of the event and that sort of thing. And we also have a sensory room, which is for anybody that gets overwhelmed. And that space, we know how to run very well, because I've been doing it at larger cons for the last year.
Oh.
Going there and setting up a space for people that get overwhelmed at the larger cons to come in. So we're trying to not only have this convention, specifically made to be sensory friendly, but also to make it more accessible for people that have these issues to go to some of these other larger cons so they can, enjoy that experience as well.
But I know, because I saw you doing it in 2 sessions, right? 2 separate sessions so that it doesn't get too crowded,
yeah.
Right? So when's the first session, the second session?
So the first session is from 9 in the morning until 1 in the afternoon, and then we take an hour break. And then the second session is from 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock in the afternoon.
Now, tell me about some of the events, because we were talking before about you're going to have a green screen and do all of these really neat Star Wars reenactments.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest part of the event that we have is the Jedi training. And so kids will learn how to use lightsabers. They learn how to do force pushes. They learn how to tumble. They do a bunch of things that Jedis do. And at the end of that, they're able to go up in front of a green screen and fight Darth Vader or Darth Maul or Kylo Ren. I'm not sure exactly how many of those guys that we have, to be able to swap out this time. But there's always, a Sith Lord of some kind for them to fight at the end. And I just want to drop this in really quickly because before I forget it, the folks at Becker that are hosting us have been amazing. We needed a space at the last minute, and they have accommodated us. And they're also a good example of how Massachusetts is kind of leading the way in education. The reason why I came in contact with them is because they have over 100 individuals that are in their school there that are either diagnosed or could be diagnosed on the spectrum. And they have a very nationally recognized game design program where a lot of those...
Yes, we've done a show with them.
Yep. So
fantastic.
A lot of those kids that are in that program are on the spectrum.
Well, we didn't talk about that, but yes, it's amazing.
And if I can jump in real quick, I want to put Adam over because he can't do it himself.
I know, I can tell. He's not going to come out and pat himself on the back.
Yeah, Adam and I have spoken in the past. He's put so much effort and work into making sure that CalmerCon is doing it the right way. He's met with special education teachers in the classroom. He's met with the teacher aides that work on boots on the ground stuff, the folks that are with these kids day in and day out. And he's worked with martial arts studios to learn how and to guide them and help them to understand how to navigate these kids in a way that is comforting and feels safe for those on the spectrum. And that's what the Jedi training is. It's really martial arts training.
Right.
It's martial arts instructors and masters and senseis doing that. And just the amount of research and time that he's put into this is really impressive. Workshopping, will this strategy work? Okay, it worked 90% of the way, but we need to work 100% of the way. So let me do a few more events that are trying to nail down this Jedi training thing until we have it perfect, so then we can move it into CalmerCon.
So
and
Adam,
we spent a few years doing that before.
Yeah. So Adam, I'm sorry to interrupt you. How many people does it take to pull off the? Last year was your first one, and I'm sure you've looked at it and said, here are the key learnings, and here's what we need to do differently. Here's what worked well. How many people volunteered to pull off this day?
Well, between artists and vendors and folks like that, we'll have close to 80 people helping out this time.
Wow. So now your hope is obviously, this is your second one, that you want to go and do this in other states because it's not being done in any other state?
Not that I know of. I mean, there are some other cons that have done kind of the sensory rooms like what I was talking about.
Separate.
Yep. But, I mean, I've also taken great care to build this so that it's easily repeatable. So, honestly, I could go help any group that wants to do this run the first one, and they can be off on their own to do it after that. They just need the knowledge that's in my brain of how to get the flow to work right, and then they're good to go. So I have had some conversations with people in other states. A lot of them have been put on hold until the end of this month because I'm going to be flat out. This is probably the last half hour of free time, quote unquote, that I'll have between now and the con.
And this isn't free time. Yeah. So CalmerCon, just to enunciate it, is April 27th on the Becker campus in Leicester. And there's 2 sessions. Now, do they have to pre-register or can they come right at 9?
Yeah, I would prefer that they pre-register. And to be sure that you can get in, you probably should do that because we have a limited amount of space because of the sensory concerns. So if you want to go, it's best to get your tickets ahead of time.
All right. And the website, which we will put on our websites, is?
Well, for tickets, it's CalmerCon, CALMER, con.eventbrite.com. And you can go to our webpage at facebook.com/compassion.
So it's best to go to the Facebook page, or can they go to compassion.org?
I prefer that people go to the Facebook page because I have a lot more pictures and I can respond to you much quicker that way. People ask questions on the posts and they get answers almost right away.
All right. So Brendan, you participated last year. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, it was phenomenal. I was really impressed with everything that I saw. And and just the happiness of the kids enjoying themselves. There was one little boy who was afraid of Chewbacca when he first got there. And
Are you someone in like full costume?
Yeah, full costume. Full costume Chewbacca. And there's a little kid who was afraid of him and was kind of avoiding him. But over the course of the day, over the course of those 4 hours or however long it was, he kind of got a little closer to Chewbacca. You know that the kid that's like afraid of the Easter Bunny or whatever,
listen,
but
I was
also
gonna
kind of
say,
fascinated?
yeah.
He was that kid. And he was there long enough that by the end of the con, he was taking a picture with Chewbacca. So he was able to kind of navigate that overwhelm of Chewie and get to the point where he was ready to take a picture. And that's huge growth. I know another father who, one of the things he was talking to me about, and I was there as an ADHD expert.
Right.
And an
For the
executive functioning
ADHD
expert.
essentials.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is another thing that you get at CalmerCon that you don't always get at autistic-related events, like those sensory movies. They don't necessarily have experts there who can help the parents manage some of the challenges that they're facing. And CalmerCon has that. I was the first one last year. This year, there's going to be more experts there to be resources for the families. But one of the dads I was talking to was telling me about how he loved the Jedi training because it was sort of like baseball, and the dad loved baseball, but the kid just wasn't into baseball. And now the kid's swinging a lightsaber kind of like a bat, and he's hitting a ball that is supposed to be like a laser blast kind of a thing, but it's really baseball. And Dad saw that he could continue that connection to baseball in a way that he hadn't thought of previously, and that is going to help him build his relationship with his son moving forward.
Adam, what do you think we can do? I mean, this event is fantastic. Again, just to repeat it, it'll be on our website. It's April 27th on the Becker campus, Becker College campus in Leicester. It's CalmerCon. It's a pop culture comic with separate stations and costume characters and such. And it's a wonderful, this is the second year, and I can see it going and going and going. So you've gotten yourself into, I think, something that hopefully other states will pick up on. We do like to think, as Brendan said, that we start things here in Massachusetts, and they turn out to be really terrific. So what would you say, what would you want people to get out of this event, and what did you learn from last year to apply to this year? What's different?
Well, I think the first thing was the idea of splitting it up was good because we can service twice as many people. The other thing that I really was interesting to me, looking at the numbers and talking to people all day, was how many young girls were there. And I think that in these statistics that we read, it's always, I think you spoke about it earlier that, there's 4 times as many boys that are diagnosed. And I think the girls that are on the spectrum are underrepresented. I think sometimes parents are a little more concerned about social status when it comes to their daughters. And so they don't really push for the testing because they just want their daughters to fit in. So I think, that was a big takeaway for me from the whole event, on top of just smiling parents' faces, which is not always the case with kids, when you have a needs kid.
Right, and isn't that wonderful? I mean, I know you don't like to pat yourself on the back, but I've been to these events, like at the museum, and it's not, and I've seen the planning that goes into it, and this is just for one single event that they do all the time. You're talking about multi-station, 80 people helping out here. This is a big undertaking. So as Brendan said, we're going to pat you on the back whether you like it or not. So again, your organization is calmpassion.org. And I hope you reach your goals and keep up what was a terrific activity for kids and families who actually have to plan for the unexpected when they go out to places like the movies or dinner. And I hope folks listening will check out the event. It's CalmerCon, again, April 27th in Leicester on the Becker College campus. So thank you for being here today, explaining the differences. I think a lot of people don't understand it, and hopefully people listening too will feel what you're feeling. And they can say, yeah, that's what I feel because I'm a parent of an autistic child or ADHD or any issue in school. It could be minor, as we said. It could be on any space on the spectrum. But maybe I'm hoping that people listening will let people know about the event. And I hope people listening will pay more attention to seeking out these kind of events. And hopefully Massachusetts and Adam and compassion.org will be the genesis. So thank you to my guests, Adam Wilson, founder of the nonprofit Compassion. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Vicki.
And Brendan Mahan, educator, speaker, coach, owner of ADHD Essentials, and who deals with ADHD and other neurodiverse issues. Thank you so much, Brendan, for being here.
Thank you, Vicki.
And that's it. Have a wonderful day. That's Community Conversations. I'm Vicki Green. Vicki Green. Vicki Green. Vicki Green.